Research has shown that during the last 20 years, population of barn swallow and bank swallow have declined by 70%. And that immediately raises a red flag. Barn swallows are part of the guild of aerial insectivores. Aerial insectivores have suffered precipitous declines in recent years, and their plight has gained increasing attention. Barn swallows have recently been blue listed in BC as a species of special concern, and listed federally by COSWIC, that's the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada, as threatened. My name is Derek Matthews. I'm the chair of the Vancouver Avian Research Centre, a master bird bander and the bander in charge here at our Colony Farm field station. We retrap the same birds year after year, and this habitat is particularly important for barn swallows, for aerial insectivores. So these birds use these areas to feed, they use the surrounding areas to nest. So again, the habitat here at Colony Farm is critical for our barn swallows. Colony Farm is located at the confluence of the Coquitlam and Fraser rivers. It's a 1,000-acre park, 404-hectare park. Areas like our parks, like Colony Park, where birds can rest and refuel, are critical to their long neotropical migrations. There are 8 species of North American swallows, and we've had 7 of those 8 species here in Colony Farm and banded 6 of those species. So this old field habitat is critical for aerial insectivores because of the abundance of insects. Barn swallows normally don't forage much further than about 1 kilometre away from their nest sites. So if you look at somewhere like the Lower Mainland and the increasing urban sprawl and the loss of habitat that can support insect populations, these birds are possibly having to fly even further to find available food sources, and that could very negatively impact productivity, breeding success. We have 30 nets here in the old field habitat, so it is a very large banding operation. We band about 6,500 birds per year. Banding starts April 1st and continues to October 31st. And this is our 3rd year of banding and monitoring the park, and we've banded 85 species of songbirds. Bird banding is useful in both research and management projects. The individual identification of birds makes possible studies that are not otherwise available to just birders or to censuses. I think one of the tremendous roles that we do play with our banding station here at Colony Farm is that it is right in the middle of an urban landscape, right in the heart of Vancouver. So it gives us a tremendous opportunity to have visitors to the station, and we have many, many visitors. The banding work that we do is very, very important from a research perspective, but it's also critically important to the public. A big part of what we do is educating, getting people to come to the banding station and really make some of these environmental issues real. When we're able to put a baby barn swallow this close and personal, it makes it so much more real than reading an article on declines of aerial insectivores. When we were all growing up, barn swallows were a very, very common bird. They're still a widespread species. They're the most widespread swallow in the world. And I think for all of us growing up, barn swallows were just basically a way of life. Loss of any biodiversity is critical. It's critical to the survival of us as a species to make sure that we continue to share the planet with all species. But aerial insectivores, of course, serve a purpose. They serve a purpose in controlling insects. You know, it's critical to our survival for those birds to remain as part of the natural habitat and the landscape.
My name is Elizabeth Benser, and I'm in the Faculty of Resource and Environment Management at SFU, and I am a master's candidate. I did my undergrad at the University of Waterloo in environmental studies and biology, and I wanted to move out to BC and come to SFU to pursue a master's degree, but I was really passionate about specifically working on the western skink as a species. So the western skink is a special species in BC because they're one of only 2 lizard species that exists today in BC, one being the western skink and the other one is the northern alligator lizard. So they are significant because they contribute to the biodiversity of our province. Reptiles as a guild are not really well represented across Canada, so these are one of very few species that we're fortunate enough to have in our province and our country. We went out together last week in April and we were looking for skinks. This was in the Vaso Bighorn National Wildlife Area, and this is a really good habitat for the skinks to be. Skinks really love areas that don't have too much tree cover, so not too much shade. They like getting direct sunlight. They like southwest facing slopes where you get a lot of that warm afternoon sun coming in. They like habitats that have abundant cover for them to hide from predators and also forage. So areas like talus slopes and basically slopes that have like a lot of loose cover that they can hide underneath. Not too much grass, things like that. Those are all really good habitats for skinks. Western skinks have this fantastic cobalt blue colored tail, and biologists think it's probably a way to attract predators and distract them. So if a predator is coming after a western skink, they go for the tail instead of going for the body. And once a predator grabs onto the tail, a skink is able to drop the tail, so it breaks off at a certain point. It doesn't have to be the entire tail. I've seen a couple times where they've just lost the tip of their tail, so the tail comes off completely and the skink is allowed to escape and get away unharmed for the most part because they can completely regenerate their tail. The ones that we found, only one of them had a slightly blue tail on the tip. The other 2 didn't have blue tails at all, so they were definitely adults, and it's not completely uncommon to find skinks that don't have blue tails. The majority of them do have the bright blue tail though. As far as my methods go for my fieldwork, I start out in an area that I've defined beforehand on my map. I know which area I'm going to. So I go out and I basically just start flipping rocks that look good. And as soon as I've found a skink, I'll stop, take a GPS coordinate of where the skink was, which also tells me the elevation that I'm at too. And then I take a look at the rock that they were found under. I identify the substrate type that it was on. Was it on vegetation? Was it on sitting on top of another rock? Was it on bare soil? And then I do a whole bunch of other measurements such as slope, angle, aspect, which is which direction it's facing. I measure the length, width, thickness, and the depth that the rock is embedded in the soil. And then I also take weather measurements as well. Field work on a species like this can definitely be discouraging, especially, when you're lifting 200, 300 rocks at a time and not finding anything. It can get a little depressing after a little while. But there's always the hope that you can find another skink under that next rock, and once you do find that skink, it makes the last several hours of hard work all worth it. Finding that individual is awesome. It just makes your day every time. And I just try to keep in my mind that even the rocks that I flip where I'm not finding anything, I'm still getting really good data on the species, and it's still contributing to the body of scientific literature out there about them. The western skink was listed as special concern by the federal government in 2002. Some of the main threats that are facing the western skink are urban development, agricultural development, mostly in the Okanagan region, which is the fastest developing region in the province. So all of these things are contributing to the fragmentation of the western skink's habitat, cutting off populations from each other so they can't disperse and mingle, and creating genetic isolation of populations, and just decreasing useful habitat overall. I absolutely love western skinks. I can't talk enough about them. I think they're a really awesome species, really deserve the attention of conservationists and the public as well. It's just something I've really been passionate about ever since I found out that they existed. I think reptiles as a guild really need people who are, champions, who go out and really advocate for the species and are really passionate about them specifically and like to get things done. So I'd really like to be that person in BC.
Well, the last badger recovery plan that we developed, we estimated provincially that we had approximately 300 badgers left in British Columbia. As such, they are red listed in BC and endangered nationally. Well, we think one of the main reasons that badgers are endangered in BC is because of roadkill. And badgers don't do well on roads, and they're suffering quite a bit of mortality as such. Approximately 50% of all the animals that we've implanted with radio transmitters have died on the road. But we think that it's probably even higher than that because there are other badgers that are getting injured on the road, crawl off the road and die, and then those animals aren't being returned to us by the public, and therefore we don't know what percentage of the population dies in that fashion. But we do know that roadkill accounts for approximately or even greater than 50%. Yes, well, badgers are susceptible to roadkill, partly because badgers' breeding time and the dispersion of young occurs at the same time that we have peak traffic volumes in the caribou, with people moving through, going to Alaska and vacationing as well. Badgers are nocturnal, so they're mostly active at night, and they're very low to the ground, hard to see, and so that's why we suffer quite a bit of roadkill. Part of our research has been to determine where badgers cross the road and determine areas where we have higher density of roadkill than we would have in other areas. We're hoping there will be specific recommendations as to different measures that we can take, not only when we build roads, but maintain roads and design roads, to actually reduce not only badger mortality, but mortality for many other species as well. One of the common misconceptions about badgers is that they're a vicious animal and that you have to be wary of them because they will attack you, and that certainly isn't the case. Badgers generally don't care about humans, and as long as humans let badgers exist, humans generally will not have a problem with badgers. I think the main thing that would probably help badger recovery would be just additional outreach. I think just making people aware of what badger habitat requirements are and dispelling some of the myths surrounding badgers, so badgers are not subject to persecution in the future. Some small little things like that I think can make a big difference for badgers. They're a part of the landscape. They do provide biological services. They do provide habitat for other species, and they're a part of the biodiversity that we're so lucky to have here in British Columbia. And anybody who sees a badger will tell you just how beautiful of an animal they actually are. So we should hang on to them because they're meant to be here. One thing that's never ceased to amaze me in the 30 years that I've been doing this work is that if you give wildlife a chance, they will flourish. And it's the same thing with badgers. If we just let badgers be, and if we let them be on the landscape, they'll do just fine. And their populations will continue to increase. Never ceases to amaze me. Just give them a bit of a break, and what a difference it makes.
name is Emily Lomas. I'm a snake researcher here at the Incommute Desert Cultural Centre. Where we are right now is what's called Canada's Pocket Desert. It's a shrub steppe habitat. There's lots of sagebrush, antelope brush, and we often find snakes underneath the antelope brush because those seeds of the antelope brush do provide food for rodents. Western rattlesnakes in Canada are listed as threatened federally, and in BC they're on the blue list, which means they're special concern. The main threats to rattlesnakes in this area is habitat fragmentation and higher habitat use by people who also live here, and also persecution as well. A brief overview of my research would be researching rattlesnakes here in Osoyoos and seeing what migratory routes they're using. Also taking a look at their body condition, their sizes, in different areas that they live. Some live closer to human development, some live further away, and we're taking a look at that. And also seeing how some snake fencing and things that snakes encounter on their migratory routes, see how that might affect them and if they can navigate around those. Even if we don't use all of the habitat that the snakes can use, it might be fragmented into pieces. They may have to cross roads, vineyards, to get where they used to go. So even if their eventual destination is still there, if their migratory route is impeded, then they can't get where they want to go or they can't get back, and that's a problem. We don't know a lot about what the actual long-term effects are on some of these snakes from human disturbance. They might not be reaching ages as great as other snakes in other areas, and therefore they're not, over the course of their lifetime, reproducing as much. And they do have a very slow reproductive rate, so that can affect the population as well. You can't just take a rattlesnake and move it elsewhere. It will likely die. It needs to be able to find its way back to the den that it always uses. So it's really important that we protect those areas. They're just fascinating. I mean, the way that they eat things, the way they hide, the way they camouflage. There's just so much about them that you don't really realize until you see them up close. They give birth to live young, which a lot of people don't realize as well, so that's an interesting fact. There are a lot of misconceptions about rattlesnakes just because there's not enough education out there about them. People do think that they are out to get you, which they're not. They don't like to be disturbed. They don't want you to know they're there. Often the snakes in this area don't rattle. They really want to be quiet. They want you to move past them. So they're really not out to get you. Yes, they can be dangerous, but if you treat them with respect, they're not going to be harmful to you. They're a species that demands some respect.